When we think cruises in 2020, we usually think about like night rollers, Night Lovell playing in the background, a hoodie on, and some sad boy feelings as we think to ourselves, I wonder if she'll text me back. And it's just like a weird thing, all right? Cruises are done Subarus, Hondas, V-dubs, and even Nissan, but there was a time before all of our Spotify teardrop playlists and status updates that did cruises and made them feel just a little bit sadder. Back in the day when things were just a little bit happier. I'm Alex, Alex.Fi on Instagram, and today we're gonna be talking about a kind of car that no matter what, you always end up turning your head for. A car that has made way more waves by being slow than being fast as f***. A quality of car that takes it back to the days of paint where you didn't need an ND filter to make the car look good. A car that you think to yourself, when you have a pole shed, you'll probably own one of them because you're just straight mobbing, all right? A car genre that properly came from North America and helped define international culture. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're gonna be talking about you wanting to own a lowrider. And if you're just jumping into this video, hello, I'm Alex. And if you're looking for aftermarket wheels, tires, or suspension, be sure to hit us up over at Bada bing, bada boom, fitmentindustry.com for your newly acquired lowrider, which if you do own, I'm proud of you. If you didn't and you just have a WRX or 350Z and you're just watching this because it's interesting, well, we love you too, and we got stuff out there as well. Oh, and if you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to do so. The history of lowriders is diverse, and while we won't spend the whole time talking about it, we're gonna spend a couple 2-3 minutes on it because it's important, all right? It's like the Spark Notes, buckle up. The history of lowriders depends on where you look. Some old school lowriders and historians would say it actually started with the rise of the paseo, okay? A representation of nonconformity and rebelliousness of the Mexican-American community against the Anglo-nationalism at the time of the 30s and 40s. This was a big deal actually back then. Others state it started in the late 40s during the post-war prosperity of the 50s because America was rich from World War Dub, all right? Or at least far better off than most people. Others would say it was an involvement from the days of something called the Pachuco, where young men and women would gather in town centers to flirt and play around like young teenagers that didn't really know what was in their pants. Still happens, all right? The guys would actually dress themselves up to look a little bit classier than the rest, and the ideology followed into cars into Southern California, where the Mexican-American culture bloomed in the early 20th century. All different stories. Regardless of which start point to the story, one thing was clear. The dawn of the lowrider scene came from a culture that found a way to express themselves during a new period of culturalization. While the 20s, 30s, and 40s had lowriding culture, it was not as robust as what we now see it as, mostly because the culture was focused more about simply making things aftermarket versus low and slow. That was pretty much the way up until the 40s and into the 50s. The shift of the general automotive culture shifted away in the 50s and 60s from just looks into flamboyant bubble tops with technology and going fast as all hell. This energy is what would spawn the birth of drag racing, NASCAR, salt racing, and much more. But that's not where the whole scene went. A large portion of the community in East Los Angeles didn't do that. The Mexican-American culture of that area, or Chicanos, remained in that time honored technique of lowering and streamlining old cars, cutting springs and flipping frames that truly embody the statement of low and slow. It's more about the looks than anything else. The culture would continue down the path of creating cars that embodied just design, significance, and uniqueness, that borrowed cues from the bright and crazy design work of history. Then something big came around, all right? Big old Johnny, and his name
was hydraulics.
It was like, lowriders would evolve with the introduction of hydraulics, which helped against the growing police enforcement of not allowing modified cars to cruise or sit below the bottom of the rim back then. This was true, all right? They were picky. It got so bad that individuals protested the discrimination, particularly in Los Angeles, where police officers were commonly targeting those with lowered vehicles with violations and even jail time. The introduction of hydraulics allowed individuals to just press a button and boom, ride height, baby. This allowed anyone to pass inspection, create a disgruntled police officer, and just kind of looked cool. The days of cutting springs and throwing sandbags in trunks was over, baby. Now, you could just leave. It was actually really sweet. It was the introduction of this lowered and raised system that birthed the now thing you would call hopping, where the car quite literally hops because of the hydraulic pressure exceeding the weight of the car, causing lift of the car. It's pretty sweet. And if you've seen it before, it is the tightest thing in the world. It's dope as f. The difference in the car scene was one of the first major shifts in the lowrider, shifting out of the typical car scene, and is considered by mostly everyone the first major fracture of car culture in America. The days of individuals like Ed Roth and Speed Rockets dominating the entire scene was over. The low and slow mentality caused an incredible amount of talk in Los Angeles, eventually referring to the new low-riding style as this. Which means turning everything opposite in both meaning and function. Some even referenced hydraulics on lowriders. They called it like the politics of laughter because of what the car modification and style meant to the area and the people who owned it. It was a fun and exciting thing that you could do. The introduction to cars like the Chevrolet Impala in 1958 would further explode the lowrider movement, specifically because it featured an X-shaped frame, which would inevitably be paired with hydraulics, and it was perfect. It was like peanut butter and jelly. It was like ramen and tapatio. It was just perfect. Chorizo and cheese. The idea continued to grow in the 60s and 70s during the Chicano civil rights movement, which ended up gaining popularity in main media streams, news stations, music videos, media, and in general, pretty much everywhere. Films like Boulevard Nights would depict a controversial light on the unconformed connection between gang life and lowriders. Lowriders started getting involved in music videos, this, that, and the other thing. It was crazy the amount of attention that lowriders were starting to get, especially in mainstream media and particularly music. It would inevitably gain a staple in the nation when Dave's Dream would be featured in the new Mexican culture as an icon. If you've ever seen Dave's Dream, it's a really cool car. Whittier Boulevard would continue to see cruising regardless of police regulation as the low-riding scene adopted more ways to express themselves through airbrushing, crazy patterns, adapted frames, and fabric that would make anyone just wonder, how in the hell did they do that, dude? That doesn't make sense. The styling, meaning, and design work that would be captured by other mainstream artists, musicians, and activists would just take the scene even further. People like Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, Game, Eazy-E, and Above the Law would all carry the meaning of some of the foundations of what lowriding culture stood for back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. But we're not here to talk about the history of lowriders, even though it is a fantastic story. We're here to talk about you wanting to own a lowrider. So you want a lowrider. Well, set down your Go Fast parts and grab your favorite ibuprofen, because we're talking about what it's like to actually own one of these bad boys while you may or may not throw out your back. Here's a few first couple things to note. A lowrider is always a lowered car, but a lowered car is not always a lowrider. The term can be used to describe a type of vehicle, not just the physical height of a car to the ground. Just a FYI, for your information. And second, if you actually did do it, I'm so proud of you. Owning a lowrider is so freaking neat. Having a lowrider is an incredible experience because it's extremely opposite to what many know in the current day and age. The life of crazy colors, crazy designs, low bodies with small wheels and bubbly tires, all right? There's something so uniquely incredible about them. Whether you end up owning a lowrider